Egyptians were first aware of this. This has been pointed out in the latest essay by Dr. Papademos, the Greek physicist, and he showed that in America, in spite of all the contribution of blacks to science, and when I come to speak on blacks in science in a later lecture, I will show you what blacks are doing in America today, even in the space program, where they're playing leading roles in research, and you never hear anything about them. You never see their pictures. You hear about Bluford. I was on Cape Kennedy. I was at Cape Canaveral. I was one of the few blacks who was allowed to witness the blast off of the space shuttle with the first black. He's nothing compared to the black technicians in the space program. But those are the things that you're presented with. The major things are always kept on the cover. It's a deliberate policy, just like the light bulb, where you have Edison experimenting with the light bulb, not getting very far. He could have only burned the light for 16 hours. It's a black man who invented the carbon filament that made light practical and universal. It is a black man who wrote the first book on incandescent electric lighting. It is a black man who supervised the lighting of London and New York. We never hear anything about that. I saw a program on television in the United States on Edison, and Edison is going to bed and waking up like the great genius. And then suddenly, eureka, he's found it. He never found it. It was Latimer who found it. And the same thing is being carried into these studies, where you have a constant attempt to deny the contribution of the Egyptians. And all this talk about the Babylonians and all of these. The Babylonians invented a calendar that was absolutely hopeless. The Egyptian calendar is considered to be most intelligent and accurate of ancient calendars. It's a calendar which still affects us today. The Egyptians worked out the 365 and a quarter day. They dealt with the quarter over a long period of years. But they dealt with the 365 days, 360 being divided into 12 equal periods of 30 days, and the 5 as festival days of the gods. And when the Greeks took this over, they distributed the 5 and a quarter among the rest of the days. As a consequence, we have 28 days, 29 days, 30 days, and 31 days in a month. We need a rhyme in order to remember which is which. And there are many things, the second of time, the second of art, which were invented by the Egyptians, even the 24-hour day, which we take for granted, even starting the day at midnight, comes from the Egyptians. So these were not people who were backward, and because they're found to be, and recently there's a whole new movement, now that there is more and more evidence that you have a far greater black predominance of the black type in Egypt. Now they're saying Egyptian science was merely practical. These are empirical recipes. They did not have a theoretical science. Well, shake hand to the up. And I urge you all to get copies, because they will be sent to England for the first time. The latest book I have edited, Nile Valley Civilizations, which is based upon the Nile Valley Conference, which Dr. Finch had to bring about in Atlanta. You will see the brilliant case put up by Diop, with the mathematical papyri quoted in great detail to show how theoretical and advanced and complex was Egyptian mathematics, that it wasn't merely a practical science, not merely a science in which people merely arrived at things through the practice of dealing with practical problems. They had a theoretical science. And this had a profound effect on the Greeks. The philosophical notions too. You see essays by Naim Akbar in Nile Valley Civilizations, which shows the beginnings of the psychology of the conscious among the Egyptians and how it affected Western psychology in the early stages. You will see also the psychology of the unconscious among the Egyptians. These are people, bear in mind, who were not primitive in any sense. They had spent thousands of years. They had a long time in which to develop their sciences. I published in the Journal of African Civilization something I found from NASA. When I was at the space agency, I was informed by NASA that the Africans invented the first aeroplane. You don't know anything about that. And when was it? 300 years before Christ. It didn't have an engine. We don't know about that, but we know it was the first glider. And the NASA experts, they were just as skeptical as I was. They went to Egypt and they studied the model and they built a duplicate and they found it could fly. And they found that it had taken 25 years of aeronautical science in order to reach that level in our aeronautical science, in order to reach that level of precision, that was no toy, that they were actually experimenting with gliders. And this is not hocus pocus, this is actually recorded. You can see it in the Blacks in Science here. You can see the actual pictures. And you can see what scientists have said about it. These things strike us as great miracles so that we assume that this is just something thrown at me. There is not a single thing I am saying tonight that is not documented. Absolutely nothing. Because one of the tragedies we have had to face, and that is why I began my lecture in such a stance, that one of the great tragedies we've had to face is that people love to say things without proof. You just have to pick up a little thing from somewhere and it's all over the place and they have no proof for it. There must not be this kind of thing anymore. We have reached that stage in the study of African history where we don't have to make hollow claims. The proof is there. And we have the scholars who are doing work in these fields that can establish that this is so. When we come to deal with other movements into Europe, I have been aware of several slight movements out. I will deal with the Carthaginian, I will deal with the Moorish thing, but I want you to be aware of certain things that are never recorded or are little known. It is recorded in a manuscript by Ibn Khatib al-Makari that around 1070 BC there was a famine in Spain, in that area, and that after that famine, which desolated a great deal of the population, Africans came in, an African group came in under a man called Batricus, fleeing from some African chief, and those Africans reigned in the middle of Europe. They reigned in Spain for 157 years. 11 African kings reigned in Spain for 157 years until they were thrown out, until they were overcome by other peoples. It is also recorded that Taharqa, the Ethiopian general who was to become a king of Egypt and Nubia, took a garrison into Spain. I remember when I presented that to Howard University, how one or two scholars questioned me about this, and I was able to show them that Dr. Barry Fell of the Epigraphic Society had presented evidence of cartouches, Egyptian cartouches in Spain earlier than that period, earlier than Taharqas, earlier the Shishongs and those Sorkans in the Libyan dynasties, the Libyco-Nubian dynasties, prior to the Ethiopian, the evening Ethiopian dynasty, the evening of great Egyptian dynasties. You have these cartouches of the kings establishing that this trade was going on between Egypt and parts of Europe as early as that time. Adopted blacks, and these became quite famous. One of them, one black adopted by the Tsar of Russia, Peter the Great, was Abraham Petrovich Hannibal, not to be confused with the Hannibal of Carthage. This is a boy who was taken from Constantinople and he was brought into the royal family of Russia. He became a great engineer. He had to build an aqueduct, and he also became one of the great generals of the Russian forces. He gave his grandson, was this Pushkin, Alexander Pushkin. Pushkin associated himself very early with the common people, the peasantry, the people who were suffering. Even though he was noble born, he was a black in the royal family of Russia. Even though he was noble born, At the age of 21, his poetry had made him famous. The Russians speak of the tremendous impact